The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows is brought to you by the StarQuest Podcast Network and is made possible by our many generous supporters. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/donate. Hi, I'm Don Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Black Panther. We will discuss the deeper layers and meaning of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movie from earlier this year, Black Panther. And joining me today on the panel today, our Father Michael Gossett. Hi, Father.
How's it going?
Good. I'm a little jumpy, I think, from today. And also joining us today is Thomas Sanjurjo. Sanjurjo?
Sanjurjo, you got it.
I got it right the first time.
Yeah.
All right. So first and foremost, it's the Feast of the Assumption as we record this. So happy Feast Day, gentlemen.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks. And did I hear that it's your birthday, Father?
Yeah, it is.
Happy birthday. What a way to celebrate it.
Thank you.
It's a great birthday for a priest today, for
Amen.
the Blessed Mother to be your on your birthday. So let's get into it. First off, I just, our usual warning, this is a spoiler podcast. We will talk about everything in this. So if you have not seen Black Panther, and if you have not, why not? It's been months. And it is now available on streaming in all the different places. So we will talk about everything, and we will spoil the movie. So if you haven't seen it yet, pause, go watch it, come back and listen. You'll get more out of it that way too. So Black Panther, big movie. And in fact, I think in some ways it was a bigger movie than even Marvel expected it to be. Huge box office. I think they did over $1 billion worldwide. And if Avengers Infinity War had not come out this year, it would have been the biggest superhero movie of the year in an age when superhero movies are practically tripping us up as we walk around the house. So it's a big movie. Let me just get your general impressions first. Thomas, let me start with you. What your general impression of the movie as a whole? And I'm asking you first because it was your original suggestion to do this podcast. So I want to kind of give you the first word on it.
Yeah, no, I thought it was I loved the movie. And this is coming from a guy who knows all of the Marvel properties. I knew nothing about Black Panther pretty much at all. I'd seen him in a couple of different appearances in the comics. And then going to see the movie, I was really impressed. And my favorite part of this movie is that it was the first step, I think, that we're going to have into genred superhero movies. And I was super excited coming out of it. And then, like you said, that it was really popular. And I was amazed at the cross section of people that was there, that were there at the theater when we went. And it was really neat to see just who all was there. It was people that would never go see a comic book movie, but because it was a lead Black character, they were there and they showed up for support of that.
When I went, it was all ages, older folks, young kids, in between. Some of the people that I wouldn't expect would be some of the older folks who I think were there, and that they were and specifically older Black folks who I think were there because a representation for them on the screen like that. So yeah, I agree with that. That's one of the reasons why it was so big, and we'll get more into some of those implications as we go along. Father, how about you? Your overall impression?
Yeah, I'd have to agree. That was my same experience. I think I saw it twice in the theater, and there were people there that I hadn't seen in other Marvel or superhero movies. And I've loved so many of the Marvel movies, but this one, it stood out as like a unique sort of movie experience. The cultural elements and just the way the film looked, it really blew me away. And I went back again because I liked it so much.
I'm kind of amazed at how Marvel, especially, has taken some of what to me seem like relatively minor characters in their vast pantheon of superheroes and really made them big. I mean, Ant-Man as a big superhero movie, Black Panther as a big superhero movie. I mean, Spider-Man is huge. Spider-Man has always been big, but even like Iron Man was never the guy. until
Right.
Robert Downey Jr. inhabited that suit and that character. So
I've had that conversation a few times with people where I think the best thing that happened to Marvel in doing this was the fact that X-Men were taken, Spider-Man was taken. All of their major properties were already out with other studios, so they had to go, okay, who's the B list? We got to go with them.
and then the last 10 years, which is
right,
great.
Exactly.
I've heard so many people complain about, they're just making more and more of these movies, but especially a movie like this stands out is like, this is totally different. I haven't heard of Black Panther. I don't know anything about him. I'm not a comic books reader, and they made something really interesting and new.
Right. And one of the things I was thinking about the movie today, the plot itself is not all that original. I mean, in fact, it's the same plot in almost all of the superhero movies. Hero starts out, he starts on a high, gets dropped to a low level, after encountering an unexpected obstacle, bounces around on the bottom of life for a little bit, and then comes back and wins. I mean, that's the hero's journey. I mean, so it's not that they did anything particularly original with the basic plot line, but the characters. And in that list of characters, I have to include the country of Wakanda itself is a major character in this movie.
It is, and it has so much flavor. And I thought right around the same time that this movie came out, I was turned on to a website called Dollar Street. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but it takes pictures of all the people in the world at different economic levels. And one of the really interesting thing is that all of the people at the top economic level live exactly the same way. It doesn't matter what country or culture you're from. If you are in that top level, you have this exact same, IKEA style furniture with the plastic playground equipment and, a bed that's really nice and has a comforter and all of these things. And then if you're on the poor end of that scale, you have the same kind of culture there where everything is kind of a mishmash of whatever you can find. And you boil your water in the same way, cook your food in the same way. And then to see Wakanda in that framework where you have this country that is that, top tier kind of culture, but it's so cut off from the rest of the world that it is able to retain its own kind of sense of who it is, was really, really impressive.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things about it. And one of the things I think made this movie so popular was the idea that an African nation cut off from the world that had access to an incredible resource that provided wealth and science, technology, that it could have, an African nation under those circumstances could be at the top. And I think that fired the imagination of a lot of people who are either from Africa or whose roots are in Africa or in frankly other places in the world where they're not in the first world level, like in parts of Asia and that sort of thing, or South America. I think it fired the imagination of people. Like, this is what could be possible. This is what my people could have done. And I think that's one of the things that really got people excited about this movie as well. I mean, as much as anything else about it, the superhero stuff, the idea of Wakanda, I think.
Yeah, we hear in a lot of movies like the background or the setting is a character in itself, and that really came through in this. Something I saw at some point was that Chadwick Boseman, T'Challa, when he was coming up with his accent, that didn't want to have it be based on like an English accent or anything in particular. And that really struck me. I was like, I just never thought of that a country without colonialism. And it was just really fascinating.
It's one of the interesting things about it is we, like you were saying, Thomas, that like people at the top level all sort of have the same lifestyle, but also people at the top level in a lot of these nations that were colonized, these areas that were colonized, whether it's Africa or Asia, they have those British accent or sometimes a French accent that were French colonized, because they still send their kids to British schools or French schools or that sort of thing. But in this case, they had very specifically a local accent, whatever. I think they pulled from a variety of different actual languages. And I saw that the main language of Wakanda is actually a South African dialect. while the Jabari, one of the tribes that was separated from the other tribes for centuries, they actually speak Igbo from Nigeria. So
Right.
people watching this movie from Africa are going, oh, they're speaking Igbo, they're speaking the south. But for us, it's these are languages. I don't know if they're made up or not, but they sound different and they sound authentic. Right.
Well, it was really interesting when I was in high school. I went to a mission in Africa, and we went to Uganda. And I love languages, and I love learning languages and listening to languages. And so I listened really closely to the translator I had, and I was able to pick up on the fact that he was switching languages every once in a while we were talking. And there was one point that really struck me where we got to the bottom of a hill, and I said, let's go up to the top of the hill and talk to those people, because it wasn't very far from where we were setting up camp. And he said, oh, no, they won't be interested in coming. And I asked why not. And he said, well, they speak a different language. And I asked him a little more about why, and he said, well, they go to a different watering hole. And that was the separator, between these two cultures that had deviated and had completely different languages just because of the water that they got.
That's one of the aspects of the African situation that kind of creeps into this story as well, which is throughout Africa, even though people live in the same country, and oftentimes the borders of these countries were devised by colonizers of some sort, they still have these connections, these tribal connections. I mean, we saw that in a devastating way in Rwanda with the Hutus and the Tutsis and the genocide there. But we also see it in this story with this initial mythology that we start with about the vibranium landing and these 5 tribes that were always at war that came together in peace under the first Black Panther, and they learned to live in peace, but yet still very distinct among them. And that's another nice thing I liked about this is that each of these tribes, they remain distinct in their dress, in their way that and their I guess their tribal identity is based on, it's almost a caste system. There's the border tribe, the merchant tribe, the warrior tribe, and then you have the Jabari. They're the mountain people up. You have the river people, and it's very much. It's not an ethnic division per se. It's sort of a division by place or by job or vocation in a sense.
Right. Yeah. By what their particular group of people has always done or has always been good at.
One of the things that I had to kind of set aside was there are aspects of Wakanda that I kind of had a hard time sort of buying, which is, could an advanced nation truly thrive without outside trade? I mean, could they really grow to what they are as depicted in the movie without having some trade with the outside world? Could one small nation, like even the United States, needs to trade outside its borders to get everything it needs? So I had a little hard time with that. But one of the other things, a little more philosophical, and might not be fair to kind of impose on that movie, but heck, I'm going to do it anyway. Which is, are either of you familiar with Father Stanley Yaki? He's a theologian philosopher.
No.
He had a great book called The Savior of Science. He had a PhD in theology and a PhD in physics. So he was one of these dual smart guys. Too smart for me. But the thesis of this book is that science and technology had took root in many places and flowered in some places. Or at least started to bloom in some places around the world throughout history. In ancient China, in the lands of the Middle East, they had advanced technologies, advanced science, but it always withered on the vine. It wasn't until, and even in ancient Greece, and it wasn't until you had Christian civilization, primarily in this case based in Europe, that science and technology and understanding of creation really flowered and bloomed and blossomed. And that's because of Jesus is the Logos. God, in a Christian understanding, God is knowable. God is not a capricious God like so many of the other gods are. He's a personal God. He is mystery that invites us to go deeper to understanding. And I find that very interesting. And so what this has to do with the movie is, I guess it just kind of occurred to me as I watched it that from Father Yaki's standpoint, even then, Wakanda probably shouldn't have been as advanced as it is, because the aspects of its animist religion, because they worship the Panther goddess, and other parts of that, without Christ, it might not have flowered as it should have. But I thought that was an interesting thing. I mean, and I know I'm kind of imposing a bit on a story, but it's, I just thought it was a thought.
Yeah, and I think generally one of the things that bothered me was the fact that trial by combat, or like a combat system to determine who the next leader is, that always is going to lead to hurt feelings, to damage, and to broken relationships. And so it's hard to maintain a culture, especially an isolated culture, that's fighting amongst itself as a part of who that culture is, and not fall apart. And you see that even in just the one tribe that's that's isolated themselves in the mountains because of a past injury,
right?
And they don't agree with the way things are going, so they move off and separate. And that's how all those other cultures tended to fall apart, was either by an uprising or by an overthrow of the government, and everything shifts and changes. And it's hard to imagine that would be maintained as long as it was, even with this concept of the Black Panther as their leader.
Well, and I think the movie itself shows the danger of choosing your leaders by trial by combat, because what you'll get is the most aggressive, most militant, dangerous man will rise up and be leader because he'll defeat the previous guy. That's the danger of it. You'll end up with a Killmonger, which I just love the comic villain names, like Kilgrave was taken. So we need another kill name.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was funny.
And there's even that tension in the movie. I'm sure we'll get into it, of just that there are people that think like vibranium does practically everything in Wakanda, that it does a lot. Right. But there are people like Shuri and is it Nakia, and then eventually, Killmonger, that have this isn't something to hide, and that's kind of like the big tension of the movie, that even in this isolated place where this is the way we've done things, that there's that feeling like we should be serving others, and that there's more to having these riches than just protecting ourselves and maintaining the status quo.
Right.
Yeah, there's like,
and I think it's interesting that you use that term, that you use the term sharing, and you attach that to Killmonger, because that's one of the themes that I thought was really neat. And I know this has been talked about ad nauseum, about how sympathetic the character of Killmonger is. That you have a hard time not agreeing with some level of what he's saying. That there is that sense of, this is not something that we need to close off and use only for ourselves. And in his, that's been warped into this needing to use it for power, but that he still understands that this is not a power that needs to be closed off just to us.
Yeah, there's three poles of tension basically in this story. There's those who want to stay hidden, the very conservative ones who just know we need to continue to stay locked away from the world because the world is dangerous and we're afraid. Then there are those who want to open up Wakanda, but use this technology to conquer. We are strong and we should conquer. And then there's the third way, which is the way that we eventually go with T'Challa, which is, no, we're going to open up because this is the world. The world has changed and we need to do this now, and we can't hold back the world forever. But we're gonna do it in a way that helps others. That is an open hand of friendship rather than a closed fist of aggression. And I think that really is the answer that's proposed to both Killmonger and to this idea that's raised up in this. Is like, they kind of mention like there are 2 billion people of African descent in the world who are held under a yoke of oppression, which I think some people could refute that the idea that there are 2 billion people of African descent who are under the yoke of oppression, but nevertheless, that's the idea that they advance, and that I think they kind of reject the idea that they should rise up in revolution and conquer the conquerors, conquer their oppressors, but that what does he say? More connects us than divides us. The fool builds walls and the wise build bridges. I think that's a quote from him, and I think that's the third way that
Right.
Gosh, in the world we live in right now, the real world, we need this much more.
We could use it, yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
we need to build bridges among people and stop building walls between us. I'm not commenting on immigration, so don't take me the wrong way. Yeah, I'm not saying one way or the other. I mean, metaphorical walls between us.
Absolutely, it makes me think back to Captain America: Civil War as well. That like this movie is directly out of T'Challa having these experiences of meeting the Avengers and kind of like coming to terms with not seeking revenge and working with other people. And you kind of see that play out, that he's been a changed man already from the beginning of this movie, from the death of his father, and going into it, that he kind of has to make that choice, like you said, between those poles of staying where we are, using this for violence, or I think it's exemplified by his sister of we have something to offer. And especially when we look at countries in Africa, the assumption is so much like we need to help them, we need to do things for them. But Wakanda in this universe there's something really great to offer to the world, not just technologically.
Right. One of the things that T'Challa concludes about Killmonger is he says he's a monster. He says to his father on the spear plane, he is a monster of our own making, in the sense of like because his father literally made him this monster by killing the Killmonger's dad, who was the king's brother. He made him in that literal sense, but also just he's a monster of our making because of how we've closed ourselves off, where we're suspicious and we're afraid of others, and we hide behind our walls with all of our wealth and all of our power, and so he's a monster of their own making in that sense as well.
Right, and I think the really interesting thing that caught me about Killmonger was that how otherworldly Wakanda was, and as a viewer that's not of African descent, that has no real connection back to that African sense of tribalism or of mysticism or any of those things, Killmonger was my gateway character. He was the character that I had to default to, and Ross was there to an extent, Martin Freeman's character, but he was so sideways and not really involved in the story for so much of it that I had to go in with this lens of viewing the world through Killmonger's eyes, and then my wife pointed out, we got into a discussion about this, and she pointed out that in the end, the only character that really knows what's going on both sides of the issue is Killmonger. He's the one that has a full view of one side and a full view of the other side, no matter how wrong it might be. He's the one that really does actually understand both sides of the argument.
Speaking of Killmonger, I have to say something I think is somewhat controversial and unpopular, because every time I say it, everyone disagrees with me. I didn't particularly like Michael B. Jordan's portrayal. Like, I found the acting to be wooden a little bit. But maybe
I am going to actually agree with you.
Oh, good. and go ahead.
It's mostly because I've seen him in other roles that he's done, especially other roles in Coogler's films, that he does such a great job of pouring the emotion into the character that I think I kind of know what he was going for. Like, I can understand where he was trying to play the character, but there were so many spots where he was just a prop character. And what carried him was just the concept of the character and the idea of the character, and the acting didn't have to be fully there. But yeah, I do agree that there were a lot of points where I was like, I don't know if I'm really feeling that. I understand it, but I'm not sure if I'm really feeling it right now.
Oh, good, because it's not just me.
I don't entirely disagree. I think I read into it a little of he's such a broken guy that so I think that layer was on top of everything, of that he doesn't know how to relate to people in any sort of healthy way. That, I mean, his nickname is Killmonger, that's what he's defined his life as. And even in spots where it felt kind of just like he's just the bad guy, I think at least his brokenness really comes through, and that's the thing that really struck me.
Yeah, and I think he kind of it was an emotional single note from him. It
Mm-hmm.
was sort of the same, no matter what was going on and who he was killing, and it just was the same sort of note. But also, I think he kind of suffered a little bit because he's surrounded by such great actors: Lupita Nyong'o, Chadwick Boseman, Angela Bassett, Forrest Whitaker. Go on and on and on. There's so many great actors in this movie, which is another reason I think that made it so great. Was you had such high levels of ability in this movie. It was just great. So the other thing is too, my pet peeve: Killmonger could not have graduated from Annapolis at age 19. It is not possible. It's not allowed. It's not like you go to Harvard at 14. The whole point is, in a service academy, you are one of the crowd, and you don't stand out in that way. So, right. Sorry, just I had to say that.
Technicalities in comic book movies, you can't do that.
I know. It's not a lot, but man, it's one thing I do know. I knew about that. Another moment I have to point out is the two white guys in this movie are Bilbo and Gollum. And I kept waiting for when he was interviewing him in that room for them to start doing a riddle game. I just, those two things really stood out to me.
I will say, for me, the one thing that redeemed that, his whole way of acting the character was, and I know I'm going to be mixing my universes here, but a lot of the Joker played through. Like you're saying, he's that broken kind of manic character, and the notes that he had were they were flat, and I think anybody who's ever been depressed knows, they know that feeling where it doesn't matter what you're feeling, everything feels the same. You can be super happy, you can be really sad, but it's all just kind of muted and dead, and that's part of one of the other themes that I thought was really great was this concept of challenging the fatherhood of both of these characters. And it speaks to the whole situation of especially African American people and the cultures that they're coming from, where fatherhood is such a touchy subject. You have so many men that are in prison or that have died and that are just not present in the lives of these young men. And here you have two men who one had his father present, but only in a very separated way. And then the other who had his father stolen from him as a young child because of who he was and how he disagreed with the status quo. And to see the way that they are guided through life is really an impressive feat to come out in the movie.
I felt like the movie had a huge theme about identity and the identity of being African or African American, a son, a brother, a king. I mean, T'Challa and Killmonger are two sides of a coin. I mean, right to the end where they're both Black Panther in that sense, I mean, they're two sides of the same coin. They're cousins. And there's a little bit of there, but for the grace of God, go I in all that. Right. Or from Killmonger's point of view, if only I had the advantages that T'Challa had, that could have been me. And so that moment when Killmonger takes he eats the heart-shaped fruit that gives him the Black Panther powers and makes him king, and then burns all of the rest. In a sense, he's sort of rejecting the kingship that he's taken, but basically saying, I've come back, I've taken Wakanda, and now I'm destroying everything that made Wakanda what it is, because the Black Panther was at the heart of the Wakandan idea. And so I thought that was a very interesting moment in the movie when he does that, and he sort of rejects that identity that T'Challa embraced.
Both of them kind of had that, like, an image of Wakanda from their fathers that they had to sort of reckon with, and both were untrue in a way. That for T'Challa, that isolationism and the fact that his father had killed his uncle and orphaned Killmonger, but then Killmonger had that same sort of misleading image of Wakanda, of that it is this place where they're lucky and they're hoarding it for themselves, and neither were really true. And so they both had to kind of rise above the men that had come before them. And you mentioned, Dom, that scene of him just taking the throne. That's it's a heartbreaking part of the movie that you see everyone sort of suffering between, we should listen to him because he's the king, but this is also horrible that they don't know how to deal with it. And it kind of comes together for everybody.
Right. there's a the well, let me kind of shift gears for a second right now, and because you mentioned Okoye's moment when she's the general, the leader of the King's Guard, the leader of his army. She has that moment when she has to choose between the throne that she serves and the man who sits on the throne, who she despises now, Killmonger. And Nakia walks away, but Okoye cannot because of that vow. But I want to kind of shift and talk about the women of Wakanda. It's an interesting culture in that women are wholly equal to men, it seems, in all the respects. All of the King's Guard are women. Women are at the forefront of the technology. Nakia is one of the war dogs. It's what they call Wakandans who go out into the world secretly to sort of provide information back about what's going on in the world. She's a war dog as well, and so it's very interesting to see the role of women in Wakanda, which I don't know, is Africa like that as well? I mean, what's it? I mean, is this more of the way things could be, or is it reflecting a reality in certain African cultures? Do you either of you know?
I can't answer that question. I don't know.
Okay, that was something I wanted to find out. Before we talked, I couldn't get any answer to that for me. But
it's a good question though,
yeah.
and I think I thought even the love interest concept was so well played because Nakia wasn't a traditional love interest in any way. She was very much T'Challa's equal, very much a challenge for him in a lot of ways. And you almost feel like if he didn't have the Black Panther thing going for him, that she would be his better. And it's such a great feeling and such a great change from your typical superhero saves the damsel in distress mode. But then it wasn't in your face. It wasn't like really overpowering. And I really liked the subtlety to it and the simplicity of it.
It's so organic. And what you just said, Thomas, is exactly it. That Okoye and Nakia and everybody, they're just living their lives. And it's not, watching the movie, I didn't feel like I was being preached to. It's like, this is just a very normal way of living. And the respect that's there for his mother and for his sort of, like, I guess you could say, colleagues. And even the sort of playful banter with his sister, that you can tell they love each other and they respect each other, and both offer something. She couldn't be the Black Panther, but he couldn't be the Black Panther without all the great stuff that she builds for him. And
yes.
Right.
I think she stood out and above almost everybody in the movie for me as just a great, powerful woman character who we haven't seen before.
Yeah, Shuri is Q to his James Bond.
Right.
Where we have that Q moment, by the way, where she shows them all the cool toys, and thus shows us all the cool toys as they work, as they do that. That's a great aspect of their relationship, And one of the things that I liked about Nakia in this, I mean, I just love Lupita Nyong'o in everything she does. She's so wonderful.
Yeah.
But in this, she has such agency. She doesn't, it's not just I am the king and I have chosen you to be my queen. I mean, she's like, at the moment, I'm not interested in what you're offering, and I'm going to do my own thing, but we're still friends, right? I mean, just that sort of, it's a different kind of kingship for certain. I mean, there's great respect, but there's not groveling before him, but neither is it too familiar. There's a nice balance there. I felt like they really struck a good balance in his relationships with the people around him, and it felt right, and it was good. So
it felt real and it felt genuine, and that was. Yeah. And with the backdrop of this isolated country that has its own strange culture and it's so otherworldly, you felt the family aspect to it. And that was it was such a great thing to just feel like you said, it's an everyday, they were living their lives. And this is something that interrupted their lives. And we get to see that interruption and how it plays out and all the interconnectedness that they have with each other.
Yeah, so at this point, I kind of want to shift a little bit to talk a little about some of the things that I thought were either I didn't get or I thought were not as well done. The whole subplot with Claw, Andy Serkis's character, I felt was a little abbreviated. It sort of felt like, oh, here's this guy, he's an important guy, here's this thing happening, and suddenly he's dead. Like, oh, okay. Like, it just, they kind of built him up to be very important, and then he was just dead. And I'm like, that just seemed weird to me. And then there was another bit that where his friend Maccabi, who was Okoye's love interest, he was I guess he wasn't the leader of the border tribe, but he was maybe the son of the leader or something like that. He would seem to be very important there. He's lifelong friends with T'Challa, and then he throws him under the bus, just like that, snap of the fingers.
Yeah.
And I felt like that was a little too easy. So those two things really kind of struck me. Did any reaction from you guys on those?
I think to address the Claw issue, I think that might be a little bit of how the MCU is causing some of the stories to suffer, because you have a character that was set up in another movie to be this vibranium smuggler. So we've seen him already. We have this kind of sense of who he is. And it rang false in this movie just because this movie was so much its own thing. And while it fit into the MCU, it really did have its own story and feel. So you were able to ignore other stuff that you were bringing in from outside of it. And that was kind of a hindrance to that, because the MCU was expecting you, oh, well, you already know this guy, so we don't have to build this story much. And we can just ignore that and get to the really important part. Right.
Right.
And that's one way that they're suffering. And I think if they want to go with these more genre kind of movies, they're going to have to peel back the layers of what makes a good introduction of a character in a movie that's going to stand alone on its own merit.
Okay.
Yeah, he wasn't much of a character in Age of Ultron either, and then for him to kind of barely show up in this one was a little confusing. The other point you brought up, Dom, that was like the one thing in the movie that I kind of thought after watching the battle that they have at the end that he turned the man you mentioned, whose name I cannot remember, Maccabi turns on his friend. And I thought it was his wife, Okoye. Yeah. I'm not totally sure, but what happens next? How do they deal with this after the movie and when they move on? And that felt kind of, you could understand his frustrations that nothing had been done about his father's death, and that he wanted Claw, he wanted that justice. But it was a pretty quick turn and felt a little weak.
You could say he wanted closure. Sorry. Sorry.
Wow.
Well, that's actually another point you bring up, is this Wakandan civil war. You have Wakandans killing Wakandans. And I mean, this should be disastrous for a country. But, we kind of got over it quickly.
Yeah.
Well, I think that comes back to that concept of the intertribal fighting, where, the tribal combat is the norm. And, it almost has to be something that they are used to, where there are brief bouts of civil war. Then, this thing gets adjusted. Okay, now we're all good. We're settled. All right. And they shake hands and they move on with life. And death is part of that. And when people are upset about death, it's not about death between them, but it's death from someone from the outside. And so that's why the Claw issue is a really big issue, because it's an outsider that killed one of us. And that somehow in this isolationist mentality is a much greater fault than internal conflict.
Yeah.
You see that with the Jabari too, that there's that respect there between M'Baku and T'Challa, even when there is a rivalry, that they save T'Challa and eventually they do help at the end when they were kind of presented their enemies and they want to change things. But there's, even with that separated tribe, there's a real respect and sort of that baseline of mutual honor that carries through everything.
Mm-hmm.
So the other, I'm not going to call it flaw, but the other thing that kind of strikes me in the movie is the end, when after the final battle between Killmonger and T'Challa, and Killmonger is dying, he gets to see his Wakandan sunset, but there's no redemption in that. He pulls out the thing and dies. There's no forgiveness. It would have
Yes.
been it would have been a better story if he'd
Yes.
accepted reconciliation and was embraced by Wakanda and by T'Challa as a true brother, the son of his father's brother. That would have been a better story, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought I loved that moment, and I hated it walking out of the theater. I hated it. I hated the fact that there was no redemption. I hated the fact that there was this flat note at the end. And you can make an argument, well, it's setting up something else. It's going to allow us this next entry. But even just ending on that, it's like a great piece of music that rises to this awesome crescendo and then ends on a minor chord. And that's what it felt like to me. We talked about the vision that each of these men had of Wakanda before, and them sitting there actually seeing Wakanda at the end of the movie, and just both of them having their own final look in that state that they're in was really, really powerful. The more I go back to it, the more I really like that it was that subdued, didn't provide closure, because we don't have closure on all the issues in life that we face. And so it was like that minor chord at the end of a really great orchestra.
Okay.
I think more than pretty much any other MCU villain, you can really sympathize with Killmonger, and I think just that it doesn't end with them rejoicing that the enemy's dead, but T'Challa's sad about it, and Killmonger would have been a great character to bring back if he had sort of rejoined Wakanda and later on go to fight Thanos or whatever they would have had in mind, but just to have that it is sad that this guy who was betrayed by family, and it hurt and it wasn't pleasant, but I can see the merit in it.
So let's talk a little about, you mentioned Thanos. Let's talk a little bit about Wakanda and the Black Panther in Avengers Infinity War. I assume you both have seen that.
Yes.
That's a good assumption. So Wakanda plays a key role at the end. It's the one place on Earth that you want to conduct a battle against a alien species, because they have the technology to fight. So that's a good place to choose to do this. And it's interesting because had the events of this movie not taken place, what happens in Infinity War could not have taken place. It wouldn't have had the battle there. It would have been in, I don't know, New York or something, which would, New York gets destroyed for the 15th time or whatever.
No big deal.
Yeah, but so I found it very interesting that we had to have the movie Black Panther in order to have the events of Infinity War, as much as the events are meaningless in the end because he snapped his fingers. And apparently we're not. Yeah, go ahead.
I liked that we go from one super sympathetic antagonist to an antagonist who you can totally understand, as wrong as he might be and as wrong as you might feel that he is, you can still agree with him, to another one the same way, where Ultron comes in and it's like, well, I mean, he's not wrong.
Thanos, you mean?
I'm sorry,
yeah.
Yes, Thanos. So he comes in and Thanos comes in and you're like, well, he's not wrong. It's not a great way to think of things. Let's just kill half the universe and that'll solve all the problems. But he sees injustice and he's trying to do something about it. And it's manic and it's a little bit loose, but he still sees the injustice.
Yeah, exactly. There's this weird feeling throughout, and we talked about this on a previous podcast. We talked about Secrets of Avengers Infinity War, so folks go check that one out. But there's this weird feeling throughout that you keep having to remind yourself, wait. Thanos is the bad guy. I'm not supposed to sympathize. I'm not supposed to. I'm not supposed to root for him. It's like another series, a TV series I'm watching right now. I'm binging. The series has ended, but I'm watching now. It's The Americans, about Soviet spies, and I'm like, oh yeah, you got to escape from the FBI. No, wait, no, they're the bad guys. I want them to get caught.
Right.
It's that weird feeling in there, and there's been a lot of that in entertainment now. Now that I think of it, because House of Cards was the same way, where Frank. Kevin Spacey's character becomes president, and he's the protagonist of the story, but he's a bad guy, and so there's a lot of that, and so we see that in Black Panther, we see that in Infinity War. It's an interesting aspect of storytelling today that makes me wonder what it is as a culture we're trying to work out. Where we have the bad guy that is we kind of sympathize with.
I've seen a lot of critique of that in Christian circles, just that like, why can't we have good guys and bad guys, and why do we have to make all the bad guys okay in the end? And there's something to that, but I think the other thing is that at least when it comes to humans or in the MCU, various aliens, that nobody's ultimately bad, nobody's totally evil, and that is a Christian concept to see that there's some goodness to fight for, and even the worst people. And Thanos is a great example, is that he's another broken person, that terrible things happened, and now he's reacting from that, and he's worth stopping, obviously. But to see that where these like bad decisions come from matters, because that's all of us. And I think the other thing, somebody asked me before Infinity War, well, do I need to see Black Panther to understand it? And I thought, like, well, no, but you really should see Black Panther.
Exactly. Yeah.
It makes that battle so much more meaningful. To like, this is a place you've gotten to know a little bit, and these people that you get to see and appreciate, and see them fighting for their lives, and then ultimately suffer that terrible defeat at the end. You really feel it at the end.
Just a couple thoughts. One is nobody in reality, no bad guy sees himself as the bad guy. In our world, Hitler thought he was the good guy in that sense. So it sort of tracks a little more realistic to have that. The other thing about the Black Panther versus the movie versus what happens in Infinity War, actually what happens in Infinity War, there's less Black Panther than I think there would have been had Black Panther come out before they filmed Avengers Infinity War. In the sense of, if they had known how big, I think the success of Black Panther really surprised everyone. Right. And if they'd known how big it would have been, they would have made T'Challa and Wakanda a bigger part of Infinity War.
Definitely.
I think that's in general. There's
and I tell you, I hope MCU keeps. I hope they keep surprising themselves with how good these movies are, because Guardians of the Galaxy was the same way, where it came out, nobody expected it to be a really big hit, and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, the Guardians of the Galaxy is phenomenal. And then Black Panther comes out same way, and I like that. I like that they're getting to the point where these movies are they're so ubiquitous. There's so many superhero movies that we really can start moving into telling stories through a superhero movie.
Right. Yeah. Instead of just reveling in the fact of a superhero doing superhero-y things. Superheroic things was the word I was looking for there.
Who would have made Ant-Man? And then it's great.
And to look across the aisle over at DC to see the success of Wonder Woman. I mean, which is half of it is just Gal Gadot she's just great. She's just amazing in that role. But it's really interesting to see, Wonder Woman, a movie made about a female superhero, made by a female director, that doesn't feel like it's bashing over the head with an agenda to an extent. I mean, it's still a Hollywood movie, so all Hollywood movies have a bit of an agenda. But and the same thing with Black Panther, which it speaks particularly to African American culture, to African Americans. But yet it's accessible to everyone, and it's because it's made by African Americans primarily, and it's an expression of a culture without having to carry a lot of other baggage with it. And because it's in the shape of a superhero movie, which everybody that's a universal thing, a superhero movie. I think it brings down barriers and builds bridges, like they said in the movie. So
and it's almost like the story can get out of the way, and you can actually tell a story. So, like you said, it follows the same tropes, right? The hero starts out on a high, he goes to the low, he comes back in the end, and so that's all done. We've got that. So now, what are we actually going to say with the movie?
Right, yes.
And even if it's not my culture, it was such a pleasure to have a taste of all that, and to experience that, and see how much that could mean for an African American person to see those people and those faces in a superhero movie. That's a huge deal.
I watched a roundtable discussion of some of the comic book writers throughout the run of Black Panther and the people who made the movie. And it's on the it was on the DVD extras or the streaming extras on iTunes. That's where I bought the movie, and it was very interesting when someone makes a point at one point where they encountered a young woman, a black girl, a teenage girl, who said, because I saw Shuri, who is this science-y girl, I think I want to learn science. I want to get into science. And I'm like, see, it shouldn't have to be that you see someone just like you doing the thing to encourage you to do it. But right. That's the way it is. You have to, for a lot of
really
kids.
Do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it
inspires you. It's inspiring. And that's what movies are supposed to be. Movies are supposed to be, you're seeing 40-foot tall people
right.
act out things in front of you. And it can't help but be inspiring. So you really do. We want to try and expand that out as much as we can.
Right. So, I've kind of gone through what I wanted to say. I just want to give you a chance if there's anything that we left on the table. Thomas, is there anything that you had more you wanted to say specifically?
No, I think we covered okay. Most of it. Yeah.
All right, Father, are you all set? Anything else you had to offer on that Black Panther?
I think this is the last thing. I enjoy Martin Freeman a lot. I think he did a good job for like a small role, but he was highly entertaining as this, like you said, the outsider in this movie. Now we need to get Ross together with Doctor Strange. Yeah. That would be the
yes,
and Claw. That would be very weird. All right,
and there has to be a Sherlock joke in there somewhere.
Yes, there has to be. And Martin Freeman, good American accent. That was a good one. Better than Benedict Cumberbatch's. All right, so I think that's it from us. So to the listener, what did you think of Black Panther? What did you think of what we had to say about it? We want to hear from you. We'd love to get your take on what we said, and if the three of us are not African American, we don't come from that culture. If you are and you have a take on it, we'd love to hear from you. What you think of what we had to say about it, whether we're on target or not, and what you had to say about the movie. But we'd love to hear from anybody who's listening. So go to sqpn.com or to the SQPN Facebook page. Find this show in the listing there. And leave us a feedback leave us a comment. Or you can send us an email to secrets@sqpn.com. You can write one out, or you can, if you have your phone, you can use the voice memo function on the phone. Most phones have a voice memo function, and then you can share. I think the share button on most phones is a little box with an arrow pointing out of it, and share to email us the voice memo, and then we can play it on a future episode of Secrets of Movies and TV, which would be nice. And also, just a favor, if you could, go to iTunes and leave us a review, perhaps, of the show, maybe a 5-star review, because you like it so much. And the reason I ask is because it helps the algorithm that iTunes uses. If it's a show's getting a lot of good reviews, it's going to show it to more people as they go through the directory. So it helps us get the word out. And similarly, please share this podcast or one of our other SQPN podcasts with friends who might be interested. Get the word out. We're really trying to reach a wide audience with our particular take from a Catholic point of view on aspects of pop culture. And so your help is necessary in doing that. So make sure you subscribe to our podcast feed to ensure that you receive all future installments of the Secrets of Movies and TV shows. And there are links in our show notes for various things that we've mentioned on the show and to our various places on the internet. And so until next time we get together on Secrets of Movies and TV, Father Michael Gossett, thank you for sharing in the Secrets of Black Panther.
My pleasure.
Thomas Sanjurjo, thank you as well.
Sanjurjo. There you go.
I'm going to get it right eventually. Thank you. And once again, I'm Don Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Movies and TV Shows.